In this video then we're going to have a look at Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee. So to start off with, it's important to know that this poem is written from the poet's perspective, and it was published in a collection called Sonnets from the Portuguese. Now, the Portuguese is actually Elizabeth Barrett Browning herself, and it's important to know that Robert Browning, her husband, used to call her, this was her pet name, his nickname for her, used to call her My Little Portuguese, due to her dark looks. So he says that she's Portuguese because she has dark looks, which you can probably see a little bit in the image in the top left hand corner here, basically. So their relationship was really, really loving, and she writes him lots and lots of sonnets, lots of love poems basically, and she has a whole collection, and it's called Sonnets from the Portuguese, that she basically writes to her husband, Robert Browning. Robert Browning is another poet in the AQA anthology, and he is the author of Porphyria's Lover, and they have this very solid, very good, loving relationship. So she publishes this this collection called Sonnets from the Portuguese as a dedication to her husband. Yeah. To start off with then, it says, I think of thee, and you've got this exclamatory sentence which shows or conveys her passion and her excitement to think about her husband. She continues to say, my thoughts do twine and bud about thee as wild vines. So her thoughts, she's comparing in this simile to wild vines, these kind of weeds basically which grow up trees, and they do it very, very fast, and they end up covering the tree, and they feed off of the tree as well. So they're not necessarily nice plants or nice foliage basically. And so her thoughts are like these wild vines, and they constantly grow, which means that she is constantly thinking about her husband, Robert Browning. She's almost to the point of obsession here, saying that she can't stop thinking about him. So her thoughts are as wild vines about a tree, growing around a tree. Her thoughts also put out broad leaves, and soon there's naught to see except the straggling green. So these vines that grow around this tree, her thoughts basically that grow around the tree, which is him, which is Robert Browning, are now putting out broad leaves to the point where actually there's naught to see. She thinks about him so much that it actually obscures the reality, and that she can't actually see him correctly. So her thoughts get in the way of the real person is what she's saying. Afterwards then, so if he's the wood, if he's actually the tree, and she's the vines that actually grow around them, then you have this very self-deprecatory statement here which says, except the straggling green which hides the wood. So she becomes the straggling green, or at least her thoughts are the straggling green which hides the wood which he is. So the wood, in terms of the imagery, is very positive, it's very upright, and it's a very nice image to actually describe her husband, whereas she is actually this straggling green, and that adjective there is very self-deprecatory basically. She puts herself down. Straggling green, it's almost as if she's weeds that surround him basically, and she doesn't feel like she deserves him. She loves him that much, she thinks he's that amazing, that she's the straggling green and he's the wood, he's the tree. It moves on then. It says, yet, O my palm tree, be it understood, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee. And so you've got this metaphor here, O my palm tree, and this metaphor is a metaphor to actually represent Robert Browning, her husband. And it's interesting that she uses a palm tree. Palm trees, very beautiful looking trees, so maybe she's commenting on his looks, and they also weather storms amazingly well, and they grow on tropical islands too, so it's almost like it's a paradise when she's with him essentially, which is probably why she's using the palm tree here. She says, be it understood, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee. Basically, she says that I would rather have him, thee, instead of her thoughts, because her thoughts pale in comparison to the reality of what he is. She continues and says, who art dearer, better. So, he is dearer and better than her thoughts. Having him in reality is much better than having the thoughts in her mind, basically. It moves on then. It says, rather instantly, renew thy presence as a strong tree should. Rustle thy boughs and set thy trunk all bare. So essentially, she is saying, get rid of my thoughts, basically, because if you get rid of my thoughts, then that must mean that you are near me. So it continues and says, and let these bands of greenery which ensphere thee drop heavily down. So the bands of greenery again are the vines that are growing about the tree. They're the thoughts that actually obscure her view, the reality of him. And this word here in sphere basically means to cover and to surround. So the green bands, the bands of greenery which ensphere thee, she wants to disappear basically. She doesn't want her thoughts, she actually wants him and the reality of him in front of her. Afterwards then it says, let these bands drop heavily down, burst, shattered everywhere. Get rid of them basically. She would much rather have him than just her thoughts of him. She explains afterwards then, because in this deep joy to see and hear thee, and breathe within thy shadow a new air, I do not think of thee because I am too near thee. So she says that essentially it is a deep joy to see and hear him, because when she does see and hear him, she doesn't have to think of him because she's too near him. So when they're together, she doesn't have to think anymore, she doesn't have to rely on thinking about him because she actually gets to experience him. And then this penultimate line, the second to last line, and breathe within thy shadow a new air, is a really nice line here. It says that she is content breathing within his shadow, she is content actually being in his shadow. So she finds life in the husband's shadow, which is again a very self-deprecatory statement. She's happy being in his shadow, which is what she is admitting to here. It's interesting because it links a little bit to the context. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning believed in the intellectual inferiority of women, which kind of makes sense when she says this. So she would rather be in his shadow because she's just impressed with him and who he is, and she's happy and content being in his shadow. Afterwards then, the one kind of interesting part of this poem that actually you could change the entire way that you look at it is the image of a tree. So I've said here that the image of a tree could be phallic imagery, and this would then bring a new meaning to the straggling green. So phallic imagery essentially is, it could represent his penis, so the idea that the wood and the tree, the palm tree, represents his penis, and then of course that definitely makes the straggling green have a whole different meaning. And so actually it could show that this is a lustful poem and that she desires a kind of sexual encounter with him. And to back that up, I've also said that this volume of poetry, this collection, Sonnets from the Portuguese, it was never meant to be published, but Robert Browning actually persuaded her to publish it. So in terms of this poem, it might be her desire, her lust for her husband, and that's why she might be using this phallic imagery. And in publishing it, it's maybe ambiguous enough that she'd get away with it, so that it's not too sexual, but the imagery is certainly there if you want to read it like that, but you absolutely don't have to.